5 Sports. So this from yesterday's introduction to Nebraska AD Troy Dennon, a quote from him on what, in a way, is what Mac Rhodes said to us last week. One thing that's, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, one thing that's absolute, that's going to happen, there will be a line item in our budget for student athletes at some point in time. I don't know what form that takes. I don't know whether the courts or legislators force that on us. I don't know how much of it will be proactive and put that plan in place. But he also goes on to say ourselves in the enterprise, but that will be coming, and that is not optional. Mac Rhodes said something similar to us about revenue sharing, and here we are with another AD saying that yesterday introduced in Lincoln.
Yeah, it's not, not surprising. You've got to start admitting it. And the more ADs start saying it out loud and saying it and saying it and saying it, maybe the faster that we'll move on getting something done of any meaningful significance.
I don't think that's any surprise that student athletes are, if we even call them that at this point, that players are going to get paid via the schools. That's the road it's been headed down for a while now, and that's what we've all been expecting to be the case sooner rather than later, and that's a lot of the lining up and realignment. I think that Texas and Oklahoma and USC and UCLA and schools of the like are making moves for prestige and for historical reasons and things like that, but it's also money-driven. It's very much money-driven. If those schools were getting paid the same amount of money as Tennessee's getting in the SEC, then what's the point of moving, packing up, and going and joining a more crowded, group when you can just get the same money and have an easier path? There's not really many reasons outside of the money piece that would force you into a move like that, but schools say what now? Like Florida State, that they're basically being forced into having to leave the ACC. Why? Because the money gap's too great. Well, why is the money gap so important? Because they're going to have the rose-colored waterfall and you're not going to have that? No, because they're going to be able to pay an entire roster of players real money, and you are not going to have the same ability to pay that roster the way your competitors are. So that, to me, is the driving force more than anything else in the realignment moves. At least on the surface, is that, teams are getting ready to line up and get as much money as possible to be able to pay their players directly. And so, I guess it's still a question of how quickly that occurs, but that's coming down the train tracks in a hurry. And I think everybody's just starting to say the quiet part out loud, or the obvious part out loud. And so, Nebraska will certainly be a spot that's fully capable of handling that, just with their general resources, but also with the Big Ten money that they'll be getting. And the question for all of the other schools that aren't a part of a couple of select groups of what does that look like on their end when they're not making as much? Because the thing is players are going to get paid, but I hope players realize that you're not all going to be in the SEC and the Big Ten, and so not everybody's getting the same fee, right? Like you're going to get more to go play there because they have more money to offer, but it is going to trickle down much in the way of star rankings of some spots you're just going to make a little bit less money, and I don't know how all that looks like in the end and what the competition is like for like Big 12 schools. Like how much of a recruiting pitch does that become, right? Of like, hey, come to Lubbock, we'll give you $50,000. In Fort Worth, they're only paying you $40,000. Like what kind of award does that now become in recruiting? But we're here, and it's just not official, but it's coming.
So that is coming. Mac mentioned revenue sharing. Troy Dennon on a line item basically for athletes and salary or revenue, however you want to say it. Obviously, if it's a salary, we're talking about employees, et cetera. That's another story. Now, earlier today, and I've wondered, I don't even know if anyone thought about this when this story came out. Ross Dellinger, who just cranks these out, has incredible sources. Under legislation proposed by the NCAA Football Oversight Committee, support staffers, analysts, quality control would be permitted to coach players both in practice and on game day. It opens the door for unlimited coaching staff sizes, which for some schools, again, some could have many more, it wouldn't blink. And then also a proposal, in the past this has been like, no, we're not doing this. We're not going to do this. there would still be the ones who could recruit the head coach plus 10 assistants, and who knows, maybe that changes at some point too. And obviously would be a significant change. I read the article. I read other people discussing it about, for example, let's just say Gary Patterson at Baylor, who's an analyst. He would then become maybe co-defensive coordinator. Or somebody would be the assistant offensive line coach. You would do that like they do in the NFL. It would be the model like the NFL. So my question is, most of the time, analysts have not been paid a lot based on what other coaches get paid, because a lot of them are getting paid from their previous job, and some of them are former head coaches. If they do that where they can start coaching and practicing also on game day, do they then want more money? And who's going to pay for that? Because it's going to have to be the school. Or is it going to stay the same?
Well, there's where a conflict is headed. Because I think the first place, when we go to what we just talked about having a line item for players in the budget, the first place that money's going to come out of is not the overall, the school's not paying for that out of something else. Like, there's not going to be less science labs or anything like that. It's going to come out of the coach's budget.
Right.
So most schools will not have the ability to pay an assistant as much as they're paying right now to pay them. So adding them on, if you're starting to have to pay for players directly in revenue sharing, I just don't think that's going to work. Plus, it's a slippery slope because Georgia can have 75 coaches and Boston College can have 12. It's just kind of silly. And then also, because things become an arm race, and sometimes I liked when they limited, because Nick Saban set up essentially a call center for recruiting, and they said, hey, we can't keep up with that. We can't have people calling just all day long doing recruits like you can. So they had to limit that. I think it also saves schools from themselves a little bit, and where, look, if you look at any men's basketball roster right now or coaching staff, there's a coach for every player.
Yep.
And to me, it seems a little bit much. And so I think that they maybe need to kind of rein that in a little bit.
I don't know. It just seems pretty simple to me. Texas will pay more coaches more regular money because they have a lot of money to spend, and schools that don't have a lot of money won't be able to do it. I mean, so it's just
More
another
separation.
advantage for schools that have the most money to go and hire 3 former head coaches that, I mean, they're paying them anyways, but to your question, they're going to want more money if they're suddenly allowed to coach practice. I mean, is that not a bigger gig than what you were doing?
No, that's what I wonder if anyone ever, I'm sure people thought that. That's the first thing I thought of. Now those who can afford more, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to have a problem bringing on Gary Patterson to be a co-defensive coordinator, whereas the rules limited that. And I don't know if they would give him tags like that. I just think like watching Gary Patterson now, he has to just stand in the field and just watch and take notes. And I've seen him do that now during a couple of practices, and that's all. And you can tell he's itching to go and instruct somebody, but he's not allowed to. And under this, he'd be allowed to. And I don't know what that would mean in terms of title. I don't know how much that would drastically change. It's maybe a case-by-case basis. But there's also a reason that you probably do like having him in the analyst role and not having him as a full-blown DC, because you don't want to pay a full-blown DC. But that's going to be up to the schools and their budgets and what they've got in terms of a on-field staff already. But, yeah, this certainly opens the door for Alabama, who's led the way in the big, broad analyst staffs with former head coaches and the like. It would just make more of that occur, but just a little bit more clear-cut on what those guys are allowed to do. And that on-field instruction, if you suddenly have a lot of former head coaches and you've got 5 head coaches that are out there coaching your practices, that seems like a pretty good advantage. So interested to see how this could be abused like everything else once it's got a little bit of room to breathe. There's always a school or schools that find a way to take it to the extreme, to then we're suddenly wait a second. And it's typically a team in the Southeast more often than not.
Well, Alabama had all the analysts, and then all of a sudden others started adding more analysts.
So I don't know what this would look like in terms of how you could abuse this or what, or if it just be unlimited staffs and you just pay as many guys as you want to. It's kind of what it sounds like it would be. So, again, on a discretionary basis, but there's going to be some schools that obviously just can't afford to pay 2, 3, even 1 analyst real-time money, whereas right now you can pay $40,000 for a guy to watch film for you, but if he's suddenly going to be able to coach defense, then add a 0 to that for some of those guys, and that's not going to be something that everybody can just do willy-nilly.
All right, we will